Hello, and welcome back to Lady Jane Books. Today, I have an incredibly exciting live show. I am here with one of my all-time favorite booktube buddies, Kari from Very Literary Kari. Hi, Kari.
Hey Jane, it's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to have you here as a guest.
This was one of my all-time favorite buddy reading experiences. So let me just say that from the get-go.
Me too. So, for people just tuning in, Kari and I read Hour of the Witch by Chris Bohjalian. There it is. Look at that cover. It's like the most gorgeous cover ever, too. And so we read this throughout October because for those who don't know, Kari is a history buff. She knows her history, especially anything to do with JFK. And I love spooky stuff. I love witches and like Salem witch trials and things. So when we were doing choosing our buddy read, we were like, how about we have the best of both worlds? And we chose Hour of the Witch by Christopher Bohjalian. And that's what we will be discussing today.
So I just want to say thank you for choosing such a wonderful book, Jane, because I feel like this book was the perfect mixture of, historical fiction and mystery and a little bit of thriller, and it just had everything. So I think you picked the perfect book for us to buddy read.
Thank you. I was so nervous because I knew it was supposed to be like a historical thriller, and I knew it had to do with like Puritan times and, a girl living in, this really, really scary time in history where she was. And I was like, well, why not combine the best of both worlds? Because Kari can tell me all about the history and all the all the times type of thing. And here I am like, it's spooky. I love it. So it was like the greatest thing. And I have to say, spoiler alert, I think we both really enjoyed this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to start in first couple of like 15 minutes being non-spoilery. We're going to talk about our general ideas of the book. And then after that, I will announce that there's going to be a spoilery section. So anybody watching does not want to be spoiled. And I get it because this book was so fantastic. Like you don't want to be spoiled for it. We will politely say adieu at that time. So that's kind of my idea of the day, and then we're going to go into spoilers and like we have so much to discuss. I'm just like jumping out of my skin excited about it. So Kari, how about you start with just your general ideas of the books?
So it was kind of funny because when we started reading this, Jane and I were trying to determine the pacing, and we just totally bypassed the pacing. We were so into this book that we had agreed to check in every Saturday, just once a week. And once we both started reading, I mean, we had to talk about this book. There was just so much to talk about. And the conversations we had, they were funny. I mean, they could get you really just angry and riled up because there's a lot in this book that deals with, gender roles and misogyny, and reading some of this stuff could really, hit a nerve. And it definitely hit some nerves, I think, with Jane and I. But I really liked that this book, for me, it felt like a very authentic historical perspective. And I feel like it dealt with a lot of those topics that we just mentioned without it feeling like forced or manufactured. I feel like a lot of times with more recent books, because they're trying to hit on a particular theme or a particular part of the content, they force it, and you can tell. You can so tell. And with this book, it wasn't like that. It was for me, it was a little bit of a slow burn, but it was just enough to keep you hooked. Like, and I know, Jane, we talked about this at the beginning of each chapter. They have excerpts from witness testimony and court records and trials, and that did a great job of foreshadowing things to come and really getting you invested in the story. So I was hooked. I loved it.
I was too. And the funny part is that you mentioned you know, we were like going to check in every Saturday, and like I had my 25 pages a day to read. I bypassed that, you know, my very first day. I read like 75 pages my first day, and then I'm like, oh, I can't talk to Kari about it because what if she's like, you know, behind? But then you turned out to be like way ahead of me, so we were just like, all right, that plan's just gone to sand. So we're just going to do all of it together. I agree. I think right off the bat, this was a very like, it was a slow burn, but it was very intriguing. Like you were wondering what was happening, and it really just caught you instead of it being like, oh, this is so boring. There's so much world building. I don't know if that's because I personally have like a lot of familiarity with like the Salem witch trials because I love that type of history. But it was kind of like I couldn't stop reading because I wanted to know what happened next, even from like the very first chapter. And I agree that the little like excerpts of the trials, well, okay, the little like excerpts at the beginning of the chapter kind of made it so that you're thinking ahead, saying, okay, well, if this is X character, why are they saying that? What's happening? I have to keep reading to find out. And it was a very, very effective way to write the book, in my opinion.
Have you ever read this author before, Jane?
No, I have not. Have you?
I have not, but this book, and I'm not familiar. Someone who's read other books may be able to tell us, but I feel like he is an expert at creating like this sense of dread and
Yeah.
foreboding. And I was worried about this character. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it kept me up at night, but I mean, almost, you know, like I was worried about what was going to happen to our main character, Mary Deerfield.
I think so too. And I think with how he set up the characters around her, and you didn't really know what was going on and who was good and who was bad, that totally added to it too, because I'm like, she's going to get in such trouble. And I think that also comes from historically knowing what was happening to women at that time and where she was living. You kind of could see the writing on the wall, but you're just like, oh goodness, how is this going to happen? So it's kind of amazing. I'm going to go through some comments because I see that we have some viewers and some comments. I'm just going to say hi to everybody. And Margaret Pinard says, can I just say, I love the color coordination in this thumbnail. Well, thank you so much. It was completely accidental. It was kind of funny that Kari sent me a photo that just happened to match the cover. So I'm like, well, I can't be the odd one out. I have to match the cover now too. So I ran and put together an outfit. So that worked out well. But Kari did that. That was all a Kari idea.
No, you know, Lady Jane Books is always classy and put together. So that was all you.
Oh, thank you. And we have Stephen Corey. Hi, Stephen. Lady Jane, the princess of the paragraph. Okay, I like it. I can live with it. That's fine. That's actually very, very catchy. Hi, Stephen. It's nice to see you. Oh, and look who it is. It's Hey, y'all, listen up. Hi, John. How are you today? Howdy, howdy.
Hey, John. I won't mention the candy that shall not be named. Won't mention it.
Oh, dear. And Stephen, misogyny in the 1600s, gotta wonder what that was like. Well, it's very evident in this book, Stephen. And we have a newcomer, Jason Cross reads books. Hi, Jason. How are you? Thank you so much for joining in. And, oh, it's Noah. Hi, Noah. From everyone who reads it must converse. Hi, how are you? Thank you so
Hey,
much for
Noah.
coming.
Thanks for
We're so
coming.
excited to see you. Okay, okay, I think we should set this up too, because this isn't just like a historical thriller, but it also is kind of a domestic thriller too. And I don't know about you, but it oddly felt very modern too. Like I was kind of nervous because I'm like, okay, this could get really dry, it could get really bogged down. But I liked it because it felt like something that was still very relevant to today. What do you think, Kari?
Absolutely. I definitely feel like our main character, Mary, was a modern woman. And, you know, essentially, then, if you were a woman who had thoughts, you were a modern woman. And if you had a voice and tried to use that voice, then you were considered, you know, could be considered an outcast, could be up for, you know, persecution, ostracism. But Mary, I really identified with her because her frustrations about her circumstances I could totally see that. I didn't always agree with what she did because, understanding the historical context, I feel like most of us, we would be a victim of the time period. We would be a victim of the circumstances, and you do what you have to do in order to survive. And Mary was pushing the envelope a bit. I mean, she really was.
Yeah, Kari and I were talking about it, and we're like, oh yeah, we so would have gone up in flames by now. Like there was no hope for us whatsoever. Like we would have been first in line. But I do think I agree with that in one way, but I do think that when the story is taking place, the historical aspect of the big witch trials was just starting. Like I think she mentioned that it mentioned in the book that like one woman was hanged. I don't know. This is
Hanged.
gonna be bad. Hanged
That
like
was
a couple few towns away, or it was like way out in the other side of the state or something.
That
So it
was
hadn't
actually in
really.
Connecticut, I think,
Okay,
and
yeah.
that was actually a real event, and that was the governor's like sister-in-law or something.
Oh, I didn't know it was real.
Yeah,
Dang.
that was actually a real event. And what's interesting about this book, I did read a little bit of background on how the author came up with this premise. There were only about 40, I think he said, Puritan divorces in this time period. And there were a few reasons why they would award a divorce, polygamy, adultery, basically indolence or laziness, because the Puritans were all about hard work. And only one of the 40 was actually awarded because of domestic violence or abuse. Right. And so, that's kind of how he got the premise for the book and just ran with it. And it's really interesting to try to find out, what that person's experience would have been like, because I can't even imagine being a Puritan and filing a petition for divorce to begin with, much less being an abused Puritan woman.
Right.
So,
right. So just to let everyone know, this book does deal with domestic abuse. It's pretty violent. It's pretty scary. And there is a lot of violence against women in the story. So I just want to kind of give you guys a heads up if that's something that you're a little sensitive to. I do think it was very well done. Although it was brutal, it really showed the character's reality of what she was dealing with and why she was going for this divorce. So basically, this character is married to a very, very wealthy man in their society, and he is an absolute jerk. He is the worst. He is actually the worst. And she is suffering a lot of mental, verbal, physical, and sexual abuse from him. So that's what's pushing her to get a divorce, which was unheard of. And as Kari said, that they didn't get divorced for any other reason, much less domestic violence at that time. It was kind of a something that wasn't talked about and really was kind of hush hush and kind of taboo at the time. So that was a really interesting perspective that the author didn't shy away from all of that. And it brought to light why exactly the character was going to this really controversial route. And I had another thought, but I couldn't recall what it is. I did not know that that was based on a real historical event of the first woman being hung. That was kind of interesting. But what I think, that frustration with the character of not really helping herself, I think at where this book was started, it wasn't the exact same. I think it was a couple of years earlier than when the Salem witch trials was really in full swing. So I think that while she's like not helping herself and she's a real like modern woman and she's going to do what she wants to do, I don't think she really understood the gravity of like everybody was going to be accused of witchcraft, because I think it wasn't happening in her line of sight type of thing. I think it was just starting and no one really knew exactly how bad it was going to get. So I do think that while she definitely made some poor decisions, and I mean some horrible decisions, I think it wasn't that she was dumb. It was just that she didn't see exactly what was happening around her, especially out there in Connecticut. So yeah, I agree with that, but I think that we have to kind of take into the idea exactly the timeline, because I did look up the Salem witch trials, and it was a couple of years after.
I think it was about 30 years.
Yeah,
I think this
30
book was
years,
set,
yeah.
about 30 years before.
Yeah,
and
because I think, go ahead.
What's interesting is that, the witch trials, it's synonymous with Salem, but there were witch trials all over the colonies.
Yeah.
Even in
Yeah.
the state of Virginia where I live, there's actually a statue in Pungo in Virginia Beach, Virginia, of the last woman who was convicted of witchcraft in Virginia. And
Wow.
in Virginia, no one was ever executed for witchcraft, but there were many witchcraft trials. And this particular woman, I believe her name was Grace Sherwood, she had been convicted once and put on trial for witchcraft like 3 times, but she only served about 8 years in prison. Of course, just long enough to lose her land that she had
Mm.
inherited from her husband. But
Mm.
so yeah, there's a diversity in how witch trials kind of came to be. And so I think you're right. Like there wasn't this knowledge that we have now
Yeah.
about, the Salem witch trials. So
Yeah, because I remember we were like early on in the discussion, and I, messaged you, and I was like, "This girl might as well hand them the matches because she is going up in the flames. Like she literally every bad choice you could possibly make for being like accused of witchcraft, she did with a flourish. It was brilliant to see, but it was kind of like a train wreck. You could not look away. Like, oh my goodness. So yeah, but I do think that came from what we just talked about, that she didn't know at the time. I don't think anybody really knew, but um, what else should we talk about? Something else that I was really like concerned about, and I believe this is part of history as well, is that the witch trials weren't really about witchcraft. Okay, so 2 things. Number one, I thought it was so funny on how, the Puritans came to North America and they were like, oh, we're doing religious persecution, we're going to make our own people be free. And they literally became what they hated, fully religious fully religious persecution and all this like violence and destruction, and literally they came here and did just that. I don't know, it just kind of, it always made me kind of wonder about how exactly that happened. But I think that was all. Sorry, Kari, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna piggyback onto what you
Mm-hmm.
said. Like one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, and there were a couple of instances where characters make the comment that, you know, this community, they believe that evil exists and they believe that the devil is real, and evil is present, but it's
Yeah,
in human form.
it's yeah,
And it's
yeah,
what's going on, the injustice and the persecution, and the abuse that's
the
going
greed,
on. Right.
it's all about the greed. Yeah. And it was just kind of funny because I felt like that was almost mirrored in the book, and what exactly happened to Mary Deerfield too. Like everyone was so like, she's a witch, she's a witch. And then it's kind of funny that she almost morphed into a version, not, I don't want to say of a witch, but a very powerful woman that was exactly what they were afraid that she was, but she didn't become that until much later. And it was kind of interesting that, you're stomping down this thing that you don't want for it to only become exactly that. I just thought that was kind of interesting that the development of Mary Deerfield mirrored exactly what was happening in society back then too. So I thought that was a really interesting touch that I don't think I mentioned to you yet. So
No, I
yeah,
think you're
yeah,
absolutely right.
that's
Yeah.
cool. It was also very frustrating because historically the witch trials were not actually about witches. It was not about, witchcraft or magic or fear or anything. It was more about land, losing your land. People wanted your land, so they're going to put you to death, and then they get the land, or the government wants your land. And it was so frustrating because we actually started asking ourselves, like, what if this isn't even about Mary? What if this is about like her father's riches or the family company, or somebody else wants like the money she would inherit from her husband? So that was kind of interesting to see that you actually had that question too, because we had that historical record of the witch trials were not about witches.
Right. And I mean, a lot of people forget that there were male victims
Yeah.
of the Salem witch trials as well.
Yeah.
So that right there tells you that, yes, it was certainly mass hysteria.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the first instance in Salem where a witch was accused, or a person was accused of witchcraft, um, was related to 2 young girls who were having fits.
Right. Yeah.
And I found it interesting in this book that when Mary encounters the children in the street and she reprimands them, she does in her mind kind of have this fear of, repercussions because she reprimanded these children. So the fact that, even children could take part in this travesty, and that their word, could play a part in a trial and a court proceeding, over something as ludicrous as witchcraft. So
Yeah. And like everyone puts so much weight into like the word of a child, which I understand, to a certain degree, but I was like, you're really gonna make a life and death decision over this 4-year-old, so I don't know.
right. And I mean, a lot of it too, they're looking for scapegoats. They're looking for reasons behind tragedies or things that go wrong. So, maybe those children had some sort of medical issue that couldn't be explained, or maybe they were just, misbehaving.
Exactly, right.
And those sorts of things. So, the lady in Virginia that I mentioned earlier, the last to be convicted of witchcraft, I think a couple of her trials or a couple of her accusers mentioned things like losing livestock or crops, or she was also a midwife. So that definitely plays into this book as well, and a healer. And that's something else too, Jane. I found it interesting that in this book and historically, when you look at tinctures and different remedies, in the hands of a man, they are deemed acceptable forms of, treatment. But in the hands of a woman, that's powerful, right?
Exactly.
So, you can't allow that. And so in the hands of a woman, it's dangerous and it could be witchcraft. And, I think that idea goes back to the Middle Ages, but it was interesting to see that play a role in this. And I found it kind of funny that on one of the pages in the book, they were describing the physician's treatments, and it involved things like spiders and toads and, these things that we've kind of associated with witchcraft, right? So it's really not that. It's really
different.
not that
it's
different.
Not different. Just the genders are different.
Absolutely.
That's all it is. And it's kind of funny because hindsight, we can see that, but for them, it was so ingrained in their like culture and their ideas that they'd be like, yeah, it's witchcraft if a woman does it, but if the doctor does it, it's a godsend. This is something else that we're going to get a little bit more into spoilers now. So if you don't want to be spoiled, please politely exit the stream. We would love to see you. Thank you so much for being here. But we're going to get into some more of the nitty gritty goodies. So thank you so much. I said this to you also, Kari, where there's this boy, the brother of Mary's servant or housewoman, or I'm going to call her a servant. The brother of Mary's servants. Yeah, the brother of Mary's servant. He's not doing well. It's kind of obvious that he has maybe like consumption or typhoid or something that's going to kill him. And this is kind of like a known thing. Like everyone knows he's poorly. Everybody can see that he's going to pass away. And I just thought it was so weird because the doctor literally listed off, all right, we bled him 4 times a day. We stuffed toadstool up his nose. He swallowed deadly spiders. And this is all supposed to help him. And I'm like, wow, medicine at its finest over here. And I'm like, no wonder the poor guy's like, dragging down the death lane. Oh my goodness. Like, I don't know. It's just so mind-boggling for me to see where medicine is now, and to see that's what they expected to make him better, literally making him anemic and infected everywhere. And like, no wonder he was going to die. Like everybody knew it. But because Mary like gave him this one little poultice to like ease his pain, oh, it was witchcraft. Witchcraft killed him. And I just thought that was like, I don't know why I thought it was funny, because it's not funny, but it was just kind of so ridiculous that I'm like, really? Y'all stuffed toadstools up his nose and you're wondering why he's suffering? Really?
You had me laughing out loud because you're like, here Mary comes waving her mint around.
Her mint leaf. It's that damn mint leaf.
It was the mint. It's like none of this other stuff killed him.
Not
but
the toadstools up his nasal cavity. Definitely not. That's fine. But that mint leaf.
That was it. That did it.
Oh my goodness, it was horrible. So yeah, it was just, that was the thing that kind of like killed me in this whole thing. And then of course that was a catalyst that, oh, he died and Mary had her mint leaf, so Mary killed him. and she's a witch. So yeah, that was just kind of the weirdest moment for me. But how about we get into one of my favorite parts of this book, Thomas Deerfield.
Ugh.
Thomas Deerfield is a jerk. I don't swear as a policy on BookTube, but if I could swear, I'd be swearing a string of I'd be making a tapestry of swear words right now if I could. Oh my goodness. This antagonist is one of the most brutal ones that I have ever encountered in reading. What do you think, Kari?
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned before how, violent the book could be at times, but I didn't feel like the violence was gratuitous. It really felt real, and it was, I think, important to build that character and really to make us hate him so much because, it worked. Absolutely.
Mission accomplished. It did. I texted you so many times. I was like, Thomas has to go.
Yes.
Thomas has to leave. We don't like Thomas anymore.
This author had you and I plotting Thomas's death.
We did.
Really.
Like, this is the first thing. You were texting me. You're like, all right, listen, you go down to the grocer, you get some, mint extract or something. You slip it in his tea and problem solved.
That's it.
You called it from the very beginning. I was impressed on that. But yeah, every single turn, he just got worse. It was just horrible. And the servant girl does have a crush on Tom. All right, first of all, let me just talk about the age issue here because I can't get over this. Kari knows. This is a problem for me. So Mary Deerfield is about 24 years old. I think it's somewhere,
I think you're right.
Youth, which is like middle age for back then, I think. I think she's kind of at the end of her youth-ish, kind of. And Thomas, our dear Thomas Deerfield, is like 45. Now, I looked up the age expectancy and life expectancy for people back then, and they died at about 40. So basically, Thomas is the crypt keeper. That's what I'm saying. He's like this Hugh Hefner gross, like, character that's like a million years older than our protagonist, and he's her husband. And the servant girl is like drooling over him, being like, oh, Thomas, I like you so much. You're so great. And he's beating the crap out of his wife. This whole like thing was just so ridiculous in my mind that I'm like, these girls are fighting over the crypt keeper. Like, come on, you can find somebody else in this society.
Yes, absolutely. But too, I think, Catherine, the servant, there's some naivety there, and she sees Thomas as this prominent citizen, right? And he's able to he's able to keep that persona. And you really had a visceral reaction to Thomas. You did. But Mary does mention a couple of times how he used to be an attractive man. So he must have had some sort of swagger going on. I don't know what it was. I didn't see it. You didn't see it. But
I didn't see it.
He must have had something going on. And that talking about that choice, Mary's parents were so frustrating for me.
Yeah.
Because Mary could have had the pick of anyone back in England, and she probably could have had a better choice here.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, this was the match that was made. And I also felt very frustrated with her parents because they didn't seem all that devout or religious.
Yeah.
Even though they decided to move.
Like they like brought in the forks, and then it was like, are you using for witchcraft? And I'm like, you brought her the forks. What are you talking about?
Yeah. It didn't make sense to me. That was the one thing in the book that I was like, these parents, they just don't make sense to me. Yeah. It just seems like if he was moving here for economic reasons, that didn't really seem to be panning out. I don't know, because she talked about like how they would dress and things they would have back in England versus what they had now. And even though her parents were, very wealthy by the standards of Boston in the 17th century, I think it wasn't comparable to maybe what they could have had back in England.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. I think maybe he saw like this opportunity to build his richness, but when they got there were so many strings attached, and the society was so strict that they were like, oh, what do we do now? But I agree too. I'm like, of all these people, Thomas is the one she gets to marry. Really? Yeah.
And it's so funny because throughout the book, she's commenting on all of these other men in the colony and how they're attractive and some of them have opportunities. And, so it's not like there
Thomas
aren't
was
other
it.
options.
Yeah.
It's strange.
The Crypt Keeper was it. Yeah. I'm sorry. I call him the Crypt Keeper because I just can't. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't. Yeah, and that was something too, because I'm like, this is where we're at. Like, I know he's supposed to be rich, but he doesn't seem as rich as other people in town. He's not as handsome. He's not as young. He's not as ambitious, and God knows he has other problems. So I don't know. I don't understand how that whole thing came together either. I wish we kind of knew that, but I don't think we will. But what was the other thing I was going to ask? I forget.
Well,
There was something.
Can we talk about the forks?
We could talk about the forks. We're going to have a forking good time talking about it too. So, okay. So basically in this book, the father's a trader and he imports these 3-tined forks. So it's like modern silverware, but with 3 tines. And I guess it's like really big in England. It's a new type of silverware, a new way to dine. It's very posh and fancy. But over here in Puritan land, these are like the worst things ever. So, Kari, take it away.
So I thought it was so funny throughout the book because Mary was like, can we please just call them forks? Because they keep calling them the devil's tines, and yes, that, was a thing. There was some suspicion about this new type of silverware, and it wasn't very common in the United States until the 1800s to use that type of silverware. But what I found kind of funny just to think about in my mind as they're having these dinner scenes is how uncivilized they are because they're not using silverware. Like, they literally only use like a 2-tined fork, I think, to hold the meat down whihere they're cutting it. But they eat in trenchers mostly, which is essentially, and they mentioned the trenchers a good bit.
A couple times,
It's kind of like a trough. I mean, and they're, so I was just imagining this dinner scene and how concerned they were for these forks. It was kind of funny, to be quite honest. And I thought it was a really cool element that the author brought into it. And even on the cover, there were forks.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And
we noticed pretty soon after starting the book. So that was a pretty fun little way to work in the witchcraft, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too. And yeah, that's another thing that I thought it was so weird when the mom literally brought her these forks and they're like, oh, they're all the range in England. And then Mary's like, oh, this is the devil stuff. And she's like, Mary, what are you talking about? And then it seems like it flipped almost.
Right.
Like, the mom was like, you're not using them for witchcraft, right? And Mary's like, I thought they're forks, for like dinner. Yeah, that was kind of a weird dynamic because I wasn't quite sure how to make of that because I'm like, why would you ask that if you were the one to literally put them into her hands? I don't know. It was just kind of a weird thing, but they did play a very, very important role within the book.
Yeah, that just plays right into what I was saying about the parents, just how frustrating they were.
Yeah, because it was like, well, which is it? Pick a side.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. What else should we talk about? There's so much to talk about. I feel like we could go on forever.
Oh my gosh. Let me look at my notes and see if I have anything. Constance. Let's talk about Constance.
Constance. We love Constance.
I love Constance. She's so wonderful. She was on fire. So Constance, she's one of the characters that has been under suspicion for being a witch for a while now because she is, one of the healers, and now she's living kind of on the outskirts of the town, so she doesn't live within the town, but she plays a pivotal role in this book. And Mary is friends with her, but then she kind of has to cut ties with her because of the suspicion that it cast. And Constance, when she takes a part in these trials, she is on fire. She takes no hostages. Quick. She is awesome. Her wit is just amazing. And you pointed out, Lady Jane, that here I go again calling you Lady Jane.
That's all right.
I don't know. I feel like it's a title of nobility.
Hey, you in the corner. It's fine.
Yeah, I feel like it's a title of nobility. I'm going to continue with the Lady Jane, but so you pointed out that Constance was wearing this red cape.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like a challenge we felt, when she's walking through the town. you know, a challenge to all
Look
those
at me.
people who have ostracized her. And, you know, she's bold. You know, she is one of those women that, you know, you look at and you admire. And throughout history, when I see people who stand up in the face of, you know, great harm to themselves, you know, they just really blow my mind, because I know that most people in those same circumstances would just fold. They would
Yeah, they
fold,
would
and
cower.
yeah,
No
they
way.
would
Yeah.
cower. And she's not doing that. And yeah, she's awesome.
I know. I'm surprised. The thing is with her, and I think I kind of alluded to this with you earlier, is that I'm surprised she's still alive. You know, but I think
I think you
because
figured it out.
I figured it out because there's a part in the book where Mary notices she's putting on really expensive boots, like fur-lined, really expensive boots that aren't really from around here. They're a very expensive import. So in my mind, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If she's like an outcast, no one talks to her, no one does business with her, where's she getting the money for these boots? Unless they're a trade. And then who would she trade them with? She would have to trade it with somebody who's very wealthy. And who is very wealthy. I mean, there's a couple of people, but it means that she like probably has connections within her society that people don't know about, which means that somebody's doing business with Constance, and Constance known as like her witchcraft or medicine. We would consider it like holistic medicine now. So I don't think Constance is as much of an outcast as people want to think. I think people are doing like secret deals with her, probably maybe to have pregnancies or curing sick or something. I feel like there's this underground business with Constance and somebody really really important, or a couple people that are really important, but I don't think it's obvious in this society. I think outwardly everyone like shuns her and like denounces her, but I do think she's got some business deals going on, and I don't think she's as much of an outcast as we're led to believe. I think there's some secret dealings going on. So
Absolutely. And something else, you mentioned people seeking her out for pregnancy related issues.
mhm.
And that was something else in the book that just really hit a nerve with me, was the discussion of, you know, women being barren,
Yeah.
and, you know, the blame being placed on the women. And, you
Yeah.
know, I think some of the witchcraft stuff plays into that, because if you're a woman and you have a miscarriage, you know, and you know that people are going to look at you a different way, and you're going to be clouded with suspicion of, well, is she really a godly woman? Is she
Yeah. Did she deserve
actually
this?
righteous?
Yeah.
Is
It's
this
bad.
God's
It's
punishment
horrible.
on her? You know, then you can kind of, you know, see why maybe
Yeah.
some of these women would have sought out, you know, an external reason for why that would have happened, because of the just insurmountable pressure that was placed on them, to make sure they
Yeah.
were, you know, reproducing. So,
Yep. Exactly. Because that was the whole thing for a woman back then. It was like that was her function. That was her only contribution to society, and it's so hard for me to like say that right now because we've moved so far past it, but it was so frustrating. But this is not going to get very family friendly here for in a couple of minutes, but something that I do want to say that I didn't tell you, Kari, is that okay, so it's obvious that Mary has not had a child yet, and she's having relations with her husband regularly, as we find out during the trial, because everybody needs to know that that was another awful, awful thing
right.
that came out to light, which I think was a total invasion of privacy. But I found it interesting that it's like, well, what's wrong with Mary? What's wrong with Mary? And I'm thinking that Thomas was shooting blanks, so to speak. Obviously, there was like later on we find out other things happen too. But when you put together like they've had relations, she's not having a baby, and other things Thomas was doing that's hinted to in the book, really really upsetting, disturbing things. I'm like, well, it was Thomas's problem. Nobody's here is like blaming Thomas here. It was
Right.
all on her because she was a woman, and that just I mean, I kind of figured it out earlier on. I'm pretty sure you did too. But I'm like, why aren't we all talking about the other person in this equation here? But it was all because that was what women were supposed to do. And if it wasn't happening, it was definitely the woman's fault. And that was just something that was so frustrating to me, because now, of course, we know more about reproductive, health and wellness. But for then, back then, to have your entire character and your entire like worth trickle down into this one function that's out of your control must have been so heartbreaking for so many women back then.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And it's like, for society to dictate your whole life's purpose based on your biology.
Yeah.
I found it, very interesting that they're not considering, like you said, the other coin, the other, side to that coin, because she's not alone in this. And, yeah, I think it was maybe a little bit better in some other colonies, because the Puritans, the women did not help in the fields, did not, they were pretty much at home, maybe helping the servants with the household duties and that sort of thing. But in some other colonies, it was a little bit more egalitarian as far as the workload was concerned, because these were new colonies. Some of those colonies did have women actually helping with the workload. So, I think some of those pressures may have been not eliminated by any stretch, but maybe a little bit better. And since in the Puritan society, this is your entire role, there's really no escaping it.
Yeah. That was so heartbreaking, because now we know like it takes two to tango. But then having that totally discounted and placed solely on someone because of their gender was just, it was hard for me to read personally. So that was interesting. Let's talk about Peregrine. I think that's how do you say your name? Peregrine?
Yes,
Peregrine?
I think you're right.
Okay, Peregrine. Let's talk about Peregrine, Thomas's daughter from his first marriage.
Let me just say, you were on point. You were.
Ooh, Kari. I think I lost Kari. I lost the guest. Hold on. Oh, no. Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there, but
that's okay. Sometimes it cuts in and out with the internet.
I was just saying, you are on point when it came to Peregrine and her role in this. You were so astute. I was so impressed.
Thank you.
Because I was suspicious of her, but I didn't have it quite figured out the way you did. And I really, I like how this author, we talked about him, creating that sense of dread. And I like how he had some very obvious red herrings, and some people that we are very suspicious of, like the town gossip, who everyone, loves to hate.
Goody Howard.
Yeah. But then there were some, suspicions that slowly grew as the book went on. And I think Peregrine is one of those. And also her husband, Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan.
I think his behavior, because he's severely in debt and he has, some motivations to maybe get Mary out of the picture. I think his behavior getting more erratic.
Yeah.
I think that kind of threw me off, because I was more suspicious of him than Peregrine. But she kind of came out of nowhere at the end, and I was like, yes, you go, girl. It was great.
Well, what kind of threw me was that, it was obviously set up that Jonathan kind of, was flirting with Mary and like, obviously right in front of his wife. So like, hello, that was not smart. And then obviously Mary's having this like fertility issue with Thomas, and, things are getting bad. So I thought it was more that, somebody was setting her up, maybe Peregrine, maybe that having a spell so that way she would have a baby with Thomas, to leave Jonathan alone and kind of like make him concentrate more on his marriage than with his mother-in-law, which is a weird thing to think about, but that's a whole nother story. There's very odd relationships in this book. I'm just going to say it. It's very bizarre sometimes. So that's where my mind was that, okay, well, somebody's doing witchcraft. Somebody's trying to influence Mary. Mary's biggest issue is not having a baby right now. Well, at the time it was. Who would want to make her have a baby, and why? And I'm like, well, it's either Thomas, which no, he's not going to do witchcraft, or it's going to be Peregrine, because she wants Mary to leave Jonathan alone, or Jonathan to leave Mary alone. So I thought that was kind of where we were coming, but I was so wrong. But it was kind of, that was my thought. That was like, okay, well, somebody's doing all of this stuff to make her have a baby, so her to protect their marriage, and that's what led me to Peregrine. But
Well,
I wasn't right. I wasn't completely right.
You were close though. You were close, and my suspicion of Jonathan really grew because I was initially very suspicious of Catherine. You know, I thought this was all her
We all
ploy
were.
to get
We all were.
Thomas, and you know, but then Jonathan, that really grew on me because Peregrine made some comments about Jonathan and how he really couldn't be trusted and those sorts of things. And then his behavior gets a little bit outrageous and he's showing up drunk and he needs money. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I could kind of see how maybe he wants Mary out of the way. And that way his wife would inherit everything if Thomas, you know, kicks the bucket, which, you know, if your timeline is correct and he is the crypt keeper, it wouldn't be too long. So, you know, I was very suspicious of him. So I thought that was a great way to put that in there.
I also thought the fact that he was like touching, I don't know, he was like touching Mary like really early in the book, and I'm like, that's so inappropriate. Why would you do that? So I think that was kind of a red herring too, that they were going to have like an affair or something, which I'm kind of disappointed it didn't pan out that way. I'm going to be honest, Kari, I'm always looking for the dirty stuff. So yeah, but so I thought it was more like that type of thing. But I can see why you would think that. I could see why, because as it went on and we found out that he was in debt and he was like really desperate and he was constantly asking for money, I could see why it would be perceived that way. Who else? Let's talk about Catherine.
Oh, geez, this poor girl.
This girl doesn't have a clue. Like, okay, so Catherine's like about 4 or 5 years younger than Mary, so she's like at the beginning, I think, of the years. I feel like they only had like 5 years of prime time back then, and then they were either like super young or they were like turning to dust. I feel like there was no in between.
Very short time.
Very short prime. Very short. And so she's with the house girl. She's the servant, as I like to call, and she's very, very in love with Thomas, and it's so disgustingly blatant and obvious. It's like a girl with a schoolgirl crush. And she obviously doesn't like Mary because she feels that Mary doesn't treat Thomas very well as a wife, which is not her business, but that's just my 2 cents. So I can see where the suspicion from Catherine came from, because she obviously wants, you know, Mary out of the way so she could move in with Thomas, which would have happened later on in the book, which I thought was kind of funny, that Thomas is like, yeah, I'm going to take the servant girl as the wife now. And I'm like, this poor servant girl, like, how do you not know that this guy is a monster? Like, you are willfully blind. And that's something that annoys the heck out of me, when a character is like, you see the bruises on the wife, you probably have heard a thing or two. Don't lie to me, Catherine. You know, you're sleeping right there. You can hear all of the like assault and things like that. Like, it's obvious she knows something was going on, but either she was so dumb and like willfully blind about it, or she was just trying to ignore it, thinking that she would be the special one, that she would change Thomas. It was one or the other, and both of them annoyed me to no end.
And I think too, jealousy played a bit into that, because I do feel like she was very jealous of Mary because, you know, from the description, and not just because of Thomas, but from the description, Mary was described as a very beautiful woman.
Yes, that's true.
And she's from a very prominent family, in fact, very wealthy. And I feel like, you know, a little bit of it was Catherine, you know, being envious and thinking, oh, look at this lady. She has everything.
She's only 5 years older than me.
Yeah. And she doesn't appreciate it. So I feel like those feelings kind of clouded her judgment a good bit. And, you know, she got what she wanted.
Yeah, she did. Oh my goodness. She did, sadly. But it bothered me so much that this girl was pining away for literally a monster. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, part of me, and this is a horrible thing to say, Kari, but part of me is like, maybe she deserves to find out what exactly she's been pining away for. And that's a horrible thought. It is. But when you're thinking about maybe she's framing her mistress for witchcraft, maybe she's saying, no, being in league with the town gossip, you know, she's blaming her brother's death on her. She's not helping her at the trial. There was a line in there where Mary said, maybe they deserve each other. And quite frankly, I feel like they did. And I was like heartbroken that this girl would find out exactly who Thomas was. But it was just this was like nails on a chalkboard for me.
I will say, Catherine is a bit bold, though. You have to
She is
admire
in
the
her
fact that
own
she
in
is a
her
bit bold, and the way she spoke to Mary and other people. I mean, she's a servant.
she
So
is.
Mary even comments a couple times that, well, I really should have said something to her for being so out of place and for, being so, disrespectful, but she doesn't. And I think maybe it's because Mary kind of saw a little bit of herself, a little bit of that fire,
Yeah.
in Catherine.
Yeah.
Definitely a misdirected um, passion there, but she definitely has her own mind. And as well as I do, when it comes to relationships, you really have to find out on your own a lot of times.
You
People
do.
can
Yeah.
warn you and people can tell you things, but unfortunately, most of the time that falls on you to find out.
It does. It does. And I think it really hit home for me when she dropped the act with Mary at one point and she was like, "You don't treat your husband well. Your husband's a great man." And Mary's like, "Do you see the fork that he drove through my hand? Do you see this?" And she's like, "It doesn't matter. He's a great man. He's holy. He's great. And he's so much better than you." And I'm like, girl, throw this girl out. Like, you can find another servant. You don't need this. That to me was like, this girl is so far gone in her infatuation with the crypt keeper that there's no hope for her. There's none. Maybe they should be together because maybe she can get a fork driven through her hand and then she can cry about it. I don't know. So
Well,
sorry.
one thing
I get
about this,
upset. I get
no,
upset
it's
by this.
it's it's all good. One thing about this book, and I think kind of the domestic side of that and how that played out, and even walking through the village, it felt very claustrophobic to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I could really feel like the oppression. And I do think the author did a great job of creating that atmosphere. And, I don't want to say she was seeing enemies behind every corner, but
Yeah.
basically she's walking through a viper pit. Once these accusations are starting to be made, when she walks through town, she is a marked woman. And even when
She
she's at
is.
home with Catherine and that hostility there, it was very claustrophobic for me and very uncomfortable. I mean, it made me feel uncomfortable for her. It made
Yeah.
me feel worried for her.
Yeah.
And I do feel like this is not one of those like very fast paced books by any means. But I do think it does a good job of slowly building that, and you feel that constant edge throughout the
Yeah.
book.
And you're being watched, which is true. As we find out, she is constantly being watched. So she was right on the money for that one. But yeah, this book, there's so much of this book. Like, we could talk about it for literally days, like if we could. But something that I really liked about this book, yes, it is a thriller. Yes, there is domestic violence, and yes, it is like a very modern book. But the thing is, it was so immersive. Like you were saying, like you felt that type of, I'm kind of in a fishbowl here. Everybody's watching me, everyone's watching my very move. And, her trying to go about her life and trying to execute other things becomes a very public thing. And I couldn't imagine living like that personally. Publicly, I do. I'm in a place where I do work in the public sector, so I can relate to it. But when that's applied to like a personal setting, it's very overwhelming to think about.
I mean, there's really no escape, but one of the things in the book that does provide an escape is the shipping. And I feel like that was a great way to capture Boston as well, because you're
Yes.
picturing this very closed off, very puritanical society, but the excitement of the shipping coming in, and they're coming in from places like Jamaica, and they're bringing,
Yeah.
sugar, and they're bringing, Madeira
Furniture
from
and things from
Europe, and
France, and
furniture,
yeah,
and exciting fashion and all of these things. And it was
and
so
forks.
it's forks, these dangerous forks. And it was so at odds with, Boston, but yet it's right there,
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting, dichotomy and kind of a crossroads of two cultures coming together. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I love this book. I thought it was so fun. It was so interesting. It was so guttural, and sometimes it was gut wrenching. The violence was heartbreaking. I want to hear your overall thoughts.
Like I said, I loved the book and I absolutely adored reading it with you, Jane, because you are just so fun to read with. And I'm glad that I didn't, jump the gun too much when I started reading really fast. And we were right on pace.
We
So
were. We were actually
we
pretty
were right
good.
there
Yeah.
together. So I feel like this was the perfect pick. But I do feel like this was a very authentic historical book, which I enjoy, but I
Yeah, me
also
too.
feel like it was my favorite type of book because it opens the doorway to have discussions about issues that are very timely and very modern. And
Exactly.
I don't feel like history is, in isolation. I am very, cognizant of not trying to put modern sensibilities into historical time periods. I don't think that is good when you do that. And I feel like those books that try to do that, it definitely feels forced. It feels manufactured. It doesn't feel authentic. But with this book, a job well done. I loved it.
I loved it too. I thought it was so deep. Like it was, you can read this book in so many ways. Like you could read it like, oh, it's just a straightforward domestic thriller of, will she divorce the husband or will she be accused of witchcraft? Like you could read it in just that very, very shallow type of way. But when you really start digging down deep and start looking at the interaction of the characters and the motivations and a lot of the themes that we were dealing with, it is so immersive and so intense that I loved it. And I honestly don't, well, I sometimes think that those things are lost in modern books, those type of really, really deep themes, those type of books that you can talk about for millions of hours and still not repeat yourself once. I do think that's a very rare thing in the modern, kind of book market. And so when this was new and when it was like, oh, it's a historical thriller and it's, about the witch trials, I was expecting it was going to be kind of flat, like that type of, we're only going to do this linear timeline. But I was so pleasantly surprised on how deep it was. And it dealt with so many deep and dark themes and it dealt with, oh goodness, it was a really beautiful book, I have to say. It was heartbreaking, but it was beautiful.
It was.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so shall we wrap it up, Miss Kari? It's about an hour. Or is there any other last thoughts, any type of things? Would you recommend this book? Would you not recommend this book?
I would absolutely recommend this book. If I had one negative thing to say about it, I would say maybe some things could have been, cleaned up in editing to make it a little bit more fast paced. I know some people are very like, it needs to be fast paced. And I do feel like this is a gripping book. I mean, it will grab you, but it's not a fast ride. I mean, you're in it, and I think your comment about how it was immersive, that's yeah, I think that's very accurate. But I would recommend this book for sure.
I would too. And like I said, you can read it just thinking it's going to be like, okay, well, it's about a girl in the Salem witch trials. And you would totally get a lot out of it anyway, but you're going to get so much more out of it if you start paying attention to the other things going around. It's a very deep book. It is not a fast paced book. But it is a slow burn, but I think it was very meaningful and you don't get bored with it. Like I remember that I'm like, okay, I could skip a day if I'm reading something that's okay, but I'm kind of bored. I didn't skip a day reading this. I like
No,
forged ahead. No, I
yeah,
couldn't. So it is a type of book that keeps you thinking and keeps you really engaged from start to finish. So I highly recommend it. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. I think this was the perfect time of year for us to read it too, oddly, because it's fall and think we like witches and historical stuff in the fall. And I think it was around this time that the Salem witch trials were starting to happen too, like way back in the day. I'm not sure on that, but I'm thinking it is. So I loved reading this with you. I loved reading with you as like a buddy read partner. You were so fun and you were so nice to my ramblings and rantings. So I thank you so much, Kari. I really do appreciate that we did this buddy read.
thank you so much, Jane. It was my pleasure.
And thank you for appearing on the channel. I loved having you.
Thanks, guys. This was my very first live, so I was a little bit nervous.
Oh, girl, I
So
didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh,
yep.
you rocked it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to sign off once again. Hour of the Witch by Christopher Bohjalian. Fantastic book. Both recommended by me and very literary Kari. You can't go wrong with this one. It's a very, very good book. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.